Hi, I'm Steve Farrell, the Worldwide Executive Director for Humanities Team, and this program is called The Science of Oneness. If you'd like to explore the leading edge of science and oneness and the deep spiritual implications behind the science, this panel is for you. We are going to discuss the connection between humanity, the divine, all of life, the universe, and the revolutionary new direction that this science points us in spiritually and as a collective here on Earth. I'm very excited to be with the really distinguished members of this panel. I'm going to introduce our panel now. I'll briefly introduce them one at a time, and then we'll go straight to questions and discussion. You can read their full bios on the Global Oneness Day homepage. That's globalonenesssummit.org. Bruce H. Lipton, Ph.D., is an internationally recognized leader in bridging science and spirit, stem cell biologist, best-selling author of The Biology of Belief, and recipient of the 2009 Goy Peace Award. He has been a guest speaker on hundreds of TV and radio shows, as well as keynote presenter for national and international conferences. Welcome to Global Oneness Day, Bruce.
I am so happy to be here with this community of my colleagues on the panel, and especially all those cultural creatives that are out there and tuned in to see what the future can be.
Awesome. Well, great to have you with us. And Greg Braden is a New York Times bestselling author and internationally renowned, and as a pioneer in bridging science, spirituality, and the real world. Greg's work is now featured on the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, the Sci-Fi Channel, ABC, and NBC. His discoveries have led to 11 award-winning books published in 38 languages. He is the author of The Isaiah Effect, The God Code, and many other best-selling books. Welcome to Global Oneness Day, Greg.
Steve, I am absolutely thrilled to be with you, to be with our worldwide audience today, and this esteemed panel of colleagues. I don't know precisely where we're going today, and I'm excited for wherever it leads us, because I can't think of a more important time to have this conversation with the worldwide events that we're seeing happening right now. So thank you for making this all possible.
You bet, and boy, isn't that true? There's so much going on in the world, and we're gonna get to that. And next, Lynn Mctaggart is an investigative journalist and author, and a sought-after public speaker whose talks and workshops have transformed the lives of thousands around the world who have heard her. She is an accomplished broadcaster who has appeared on many national TV and radio shows, including Oprah and Deepak Chopra's shows. The hallmark of her work is exhaustive research that produces science-based discoveries in the world of science, spirituality, and health. Welcome to Global Oneness Day, Lynn.
Well, thank you. I'm really honored to be here with my buddies and colleagues, and I'm thrilled to be talking to you and to this wonderful audience. It couldn't be a better time. I mean, I'm sitting here in London in the UK just weeks after the UK voted to leave the European Union, a peasants' revolt, if you want to call it that. And so I think couldn't be a better time to talk about the positive changes in evolution going on right now.
Amen to that. Yes, positive changes going on, because, of course, most of the mainstream media isn't getting to that, but we're certainly going to get to that during this program. And next, I want to introduce Dean Radden, Ph.D. He's the chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS. Before joining the research staff of IONS in 2001, he held appointments at AT&T, Bell Labs, Princeton University, the University of Edinburgh, and SRI International. He is author and co-author of over 250 technical and popular articles, 36 book chapters, and 3 books, including the award-winning The Conscious Universe, Entangled Minds, and the 2014 Silver Nautilus Book Award winner, Supernormal. And welcome to Global Oneness Day, Dean.
Thanks very much, Steve. It's great to hear all my buddies, as Lynn had said, and I'll look forward to seeing what we have to say.
All right, let's get started, because so much that we could do in so little time. And again, I just want to share, I'm truly excited about this panel. It's a privilege to be with each of you, and to have the 4 of you together is really remarkable. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. Let me just pose this first question. Each of you are involved in science, spirituality, and, of course, so much more. And there have been these groundbreaking discoveries in the last decade, and for that matter, leading up to the last decade, that speak to our connection, to our oneness. And as we start, would each of you like to make some opening statements about this as we get started, our connection, our oneness, recent science discoveries? And Bruce, do you want to start this one?
Well, with my colleagues standing there, I thought, geez, I would really love to hear from them, but okay. What's really exciting to me is that our study of evolution is really, in a Darwinian perspective, focuses on the evolution of individuals. And we talk about how an individual's genetics change over time and adapt and conform to an environment. What's left out of that story is that evolution actually has two phases. One phase is, the first phase is the creation of an individual and making it the most capable and most intelligent organism possible. And when you reach a limit of its intelligence because of physical characteristics of a physical body and a nervous system, the next level of evolution is not trying to further enhance the intelligence of the individual. The next level of evolution is to bring together those communities, to make communities out of those individuals so they can share their awareness. So the first level is making an aware individual, but evolution then proceeds to make the community of aware individuals so they can share their awareness, and that's where emergent properties, exciting things come out of community. So when we look at the world right now and we see it in such chaos and upheaval, and so many people are afraid that the structure is falling down, it's basically, it's not falling down, it's preparing itself to build a community, a singular community of humans, where each human is equivalent of a cell in a superorganism called humanity. To get to that humanity, then we have to break down the barriers of separation that keep us as individual nations and states and separate us from others, because humanity is the coalition of all. So when we see a falling apart of the structure, most people are afraid, and yet I'm on the sideline going, yeah, this is great, because if it doesn't happen, we're in a more serious situation. We're facing a planetary extinction event, the sixth mass extinction of life, due to human behavior. So what we're looking at is a change, where humans are going to start to recognize we have to come together as a whole, a community, where we all share, where we become one super organism. And this process requires the folding or breaking down of the current structure of separation. So my just quick message on this one is, rather than looking at the future and being in fear of seeing it falling apart, you could look at it in a way and say, this is really great, because this is to build a sustainable world, one we can live in. We can't build it on the current foundation of life, because human behavior in the current foundation is responsible for this extinction in a large degree. So let's change the dialogue. Instead of the fear of what's going on, let's push it into what is the vision of what is forming as the other one is falling apart, because the falling apart allows us to build the sustainable future that we all look forward to, and actually that this planet is hoping we will come around and participate in. So yay to the falling down. That's where I stand right now.
Yeah, boy, so awesome, too, of course, because here on Global Oneness Day, this is the key message we're getting to. It's just that, of course, most of maybe the mainstream society would say would see the separation, but the separation is falling down or breaking down, and more people are seeing this humanity, this one presence that then brings us into a sense of connection and a sense of responsibility, which then lets us create the world we want. But let me just bring in next, Lynn, do you want to come in and let me share? We're going to rotate these speakers because, again, any four of these scientists should deserve their own 3 hours. So I'm going to do my best to just rotate them as we go through this panel.
Thank you, Steve. Well, you know, as Bruce said, just following on what he said, people have been trying to get a handle on what's going on now. Everybody knows, we all know that something is ending. And we've been worrying and discussing all of the crises that are besetting us, now with the banking crises, the terrorist crises, the climate change crises, the food crises, the ecological crises, all this kind of thing. And people have been trying to pontificate about it and said, oh, it must be the end of capitalism, or it's the end of oil, or it's the end of food because it's the end of oil, or maybe it's even the end of the world. But what I find really interesting is what Jean Houston refers to as jump times. And they are times that occur throughout history when it becomes necessary for the old order to break down. So these kind of jump times are never a smooth ride. They're always abrupt. They're kind of like two tectonic plates that suddenly collide and trigger an earthquake. But what I see it as happening is what's ending is this false story we've been told about who we are and how we're supposed to live. And as Bruce says, in this ending is the only path to a better and more sustainable future, because this story has to do with how we're defined by science. For more than 300 years, our worldview has been shaped by a scientific story that essentially describes isolated beings competing for survival on a lonely planet in an indifferent universe. That's what basically science says. Life, as defined by modern science, is essentially predatory, self-serving, and solitary. And so seen in that way, you can see that some of the things that are happening, like, for instance, the UK's voting to get out of the European Union, as I mentioned, this is right on my plate at the moment. It's a necessary and important development. It's like an inciting instrument. It's like the character in a movie that's he has the inciting moment that causes all the events in the movie. Well, this is an inciting instrument of evolutionary change. So what's happening is this kind of collision between this old story and this entirely new story that's emerging, that's sort of challenging a lot of these Newtonian and Darwinian assumptions, including probably the most basic premise of all, this sense of things as separate entities in competition for survival, just as Bruce says. And so we're now recognizing a very different story, that the universe isn't a collection of separate things that are jostling around in empty space, but that all matter exists in this sort of vast quantum web of connection. And that, if you take a living thing in its most elemental, it's not this solid separate entity, but an energy system involved in this kind of constant transformation of information with its environment. And so when you look at those kinds of revelations from science, those have huge implications about how we choose or define ourselves, but also vast implications about how we ought to live our lives. We're living according to the old scientific story. It's time to write a new one.
Amen to that, and thank God that the science that you all are bringing forward is becoming increasingly understood, because you share in your books that other scientists in biology and quantum physics, et cetera, understand this connection, but the mainstream doesn't, by and large. And of course, that's going to take us a giant step forward as there's more awareness that we are all interconnected, that we are all one. Greg, maybe we can go to you. I know one of the things that you like to share in this is that we're not going back, and that many people are looking for us to just go back to normalcy, to the 90s, to sort of the old good times, but we're going to forward instead to something better. And you might want to just share other remarks here too related to this discussion.
Well, sure. We can't go back to a world that no longer exists. I think that's one of the things that's so interesting in a political climate here in the U.S. or in other parts of the world. A lot of elections are happening right now, and to hear politicians claiming that they can carry us back to the climate of 20 years ago or the economy of 15 years ago, it's interesting for me to hear that, and I believe that they believe that that's true. But we are now living a new normal. The world of the past no longer exists. We cannot go back to something that isn't there. And I think one of the things that our community and the world at large is being asked to do is to embrace the new normal that has emerged, and it is a normal of volatility, at least for this point in our lifetimes. And as Bruce mentioned, the order of the panel is perfect, Steve. I love what we're doing here. As Bruce and Lynn have mentioned, the volatility that we're seeing is necessary. I'm an optimist about our world and where we're going, but I'm also a realist, and I'm under no illusion that this transition doesn't take a little bit of work. And I love the word work. The prophet, Khalil Gibran, he said that work is our love made visible. And I think the changes that we're seeing in the world is our deepest love for life and one another, and what we know to be true in our hearts, emerging, and us making room for that in our world, in our lives. And I think even for the skeptics that up until recently were scoffing at the ideas that we're talking about. You know, I just noted all the members on this panel. We are having a conversation that among us we've been having for over 20, 25 years and maybe even longer. So for us, this is a very common thing for us to talk about. For many of our listeners and people in the world, it's relatively recent, relatively new. And they know that something is happening. They're not sure exactly what it is. And for me, this is where the science comes in, because the science tells us, I'm a geologist by degree, and by nature, geology looks at large cycles of time first, and then zeroes in on specific elements of that experience to see how those cycles affect us. And what we know is that the chaos in the world, the breakdown that's necessary, it's not just a random occurrence. We're living a rare convergence of three cycles that are rarely talked about in union. We talk about them one at a time. It's the cycle of climate, the cycles of economy and economic shifts, and the cycles of conflict. For many people, this is news that conflict is any way affected by natural rhythms and natural cycles. And there's a lot of new studies suggesting that's precisely what's happening. But the key is any one of those three would turn the world upside down in and of itself if it were considered alone. All three of them are converging now. And I think the world has changed. So the way that we have thought, the way that we've solved our problems, the way that we have viewed ourselves in relationship with one another, it doesn't fit in the new world that's changing. And the only things breaking down are the things that are unsustainable. So I echo the sentiment of all of my colleagues here. The change is what we see as chaos, is the world giving way to a higher order, the breakdown of the things that no longer work and are unsustainable so that they can be replaced in a responsible, a thoughtful, a meaningful, a truthful, honest way. And this is where, for me, the science and the spirituality come together. Science, as Lynn mentioned, is about 300 years old. Our ancestors, for over 5,000 years, have understood our relationship to the world, and in many respects, not 100%, but in many respects, the science is now bearing out the deepest truths of our existence that were echoed from our most cherished and ancient traditions. And for me, this is where it gets really exciting, because this is the unifying force. So we're going to pick this up, I know, as we go through the conversation today, but I am optimistic about where we're going, and I'm optimistic about the change that we're seeing. And I really appreciate, Steve, you taking the opportunity for us to share this positive message for so many of our listeners that are inundated with media that doesn't look so positive. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, just awesome. Just all of the remarks that have been shared here. And I just want to say, too, that your work is so important, the four of you as scientists, because as we know, people are looking for this message of oneness, of interconnection to be made credible, to be made tangible. And where it's just a flimsy, abstract, esoteric message, many can't embrace it. They can't even relate to it. So your science is so important. And so for all of us, I want to speak for all the listeners here, not just Humanities Team, all of the listeners that are part of Global Oneness Day, thank you, for each of you for making this huge contribution. And also there's so many metaphors that bring through these messages you all are sharing. But one of them is this whole caterpillar and a butterfly, and where we're heavy on the earth as caterpillars, which is maybe where we are now, or maybe we're right at that intersection where we're coming into the butterfly with these imaginal cells. and seeing our higher possibility where we're lighter on the earth. So, and I know just in reading all of your books, the books of this panel, this is the hopeful message you all bring through. So thank you again for that. I'm going to go to Dean, and Dean, you're involved in so much experimentation and science at IONS, where you're the lead scientist. Do you want to just come in from that angle, or do you want to just comment as we are here on sort of the last decade of science and how it's pointing toward spirituality and oneness?
Sure. I think what I was going to say is that much of my own research and research at IONS is looking at the relationship between consciousness and physics. We also look at consciousness and health and a few other areas, but my own research is mostly looking at this notion of mind and matter interaction. And the reason why consciousness is such an important issue is because it is pointing at and addressing the issue of who do we think we are, and what are we. And what's interesting is that if you look back into the wisdom traditions and the esoteric traditions, it basically all devolves down into the perennial philosophy. And the perennial philosophy has more or less two central tenets to it, one of which is that everything is interconnected, and along with the everything is our consciousness is interconnected as well. So these are the kinds of things we're looking at from a scientific perspective, and not only us, of course, but over a century now, the scientists have been looking at what are the actual capacities of the mind and what is it connected to. So I think we know now with pretty high confidence, based on controlled laboratory tests, that minds are connected through space and time, and minds are connected to the rest of the universe, all of the physical world, through space and time as well. And in addition, our intention, attention and intention, seem to push around the world to some extent. So that's what the whole domain of parapsychology has been looking at for over 100 years. So what's interesting now, and this is relatively new within the past 20 years or so, is that as more and more people begin to understand what quantum mechanics has been trying to tell us about the nature of physical reality, and what leading edge physicists are now saying about the nature of quantum interconnections, it is pointing, or you can say that it is converging more and more towards the perennial philosophy. It is saying, the physics is now saying very clearly that everything is interconnected throughout space and time, as the perennial philosophy had said, but now we can see it in the laboratory, in a physics lab. And in addition, that there is something peculiar about consciousness that is interacting with this interconnectedness. So among other things, it means that, as I think as Lynn was saying, that the old way of thinking about the structure of reality, the fabric of reality, is that we are separate objects. Well, we know that's not true anymore. We can show it in the laboratory that it's not true in many different ways. And so this is not simply a matter of ecological interdependence. It's a matter of fundamental physics interdependence that even transcends space and time. So somewhere in that mix is probably what people have been referring to in the past as spiritual. And I don't particularly like that word because I don't know what it means. Everybody has a different definition of what they think spiritual means. But I think where we're heading is that we'll eventually have a scientific way of understanding it in ways that actually can be tested. So we will understand more what we think we mean by words like spiritual. So overall, I'd say that you can see changes happening in science as well in response to new developments in physics and in other domains, especially quantum biology. And you see this because at the leading edge of physics now, many people are beginning, even in the mainstream, are beginning to say that basically at the bottom of the physical world is information. It's constructed out of information. What is information? It's no longer a physical thing. So the physical world is constructed out of something which is not physical. And the closest that we can think of it in these terms now, it has something to do with consciousness. not human consciousness necessarily, but consciousness with a big C, of which we are part of, but it's something even bigger than us, which again sounds like ideas that what we refer to as spirituality. So the fact that this is now a topic that can be discussed in the mainstream is a major change over the past probably 20 years. So that's what I'd like to offer.
Yeah, awesome. Gosh, one of the things I love is these panels actually are saying the same thing. So there's a One with the Divine panel that is spiritual leaders, and essentially they're sharing the very same thing that you're sharing, and the world leaders also. And so, of course, coming from different bodies of knowledge, different intellectual capital, but it does seem that awareness is growing in the mainstream as well. Some of these things happening in the mainstream, the Pope's encyclical. You all signed the Conscious Business Declaration. The foundational thing in the Conscious Business Declaration is that it says business is part of a single reality, interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent. And then all of the principles after that one relate to that. Since we're part of a single reality, then we would do this, transparency. Since we're part of a single reality, we would restore the earth, etc. So in the mainstream, these scientific discoveries are coming out into tangible things that speak to things we really need to do. In the case of the Conscious Business Declaration, that businesses don't operate in silos. Everything's interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent. It's true for people, but it's true for businesses too. And if it's true for businesses, then that's a whole new windshield that we're looking through as to what the purpose of the business is. So, but beautiful. Gosh, I've just been taking notes here as you all have been speaking, and I'm thinking one of the things you all have commented on in the scientific research is that altruism, connection, and responsibility for each other, not this Darwin survival of the fittest thing, is our inherent nature. And maybe we can just go down a little deeper into that. You all commented on that. But Greg, do you want to maybe go first on this one?
Oh, I'd love to talk about this. I'm actually writing a new book about this very topic right now. We're all talking about science, and one of the things that has happened in recent years is that in many respects science has been hijacked. I believe in science. The scientific method is good. It can serve us, but only if we honor the principle of science. And science, by its nature, is designed to be constantly updated as new discoveries come to light. And for many of the topics that we're talking about here, there has been, I'll say, a reluctance, and in some cases a flat-out resistance to embrace the new discoveries and to cling to an old idea. When we ask the question, who am I? Who are we? We are steeped in a scientific story, as Lynn mentioned, 300-plus years old. It's a story of separation, of competition and conflict. And to a large extent, the world that now is breaking down is built upon those principles, and the world is breaking down in those respects because they aren't true. They're no longer sustainable because they aren't based in truth. One of the places where we find this is when it comes to humans. So I'm just going to throw out some new discoveries. We aren't going to have time to flesh them out. But what I'm going to say is, as a geologist, evolution is a fact. I see it in the fossil record for plants and animals. The data breaks down when it comes to humans. Evolution, Darwin's idea of evolution, doesn't work when it comes to humans. And particularly when it comes to the new DNA studies showing that the DNA that makes us who we are, that allows us the advanced nervous system, the advanced brain that enables compassion and empathy and sympathy and these uniquely human experiences, that DNA did not evolve slowly over long periods of time, as evolutionary theory suggests. We appeared on Earth. Humans showed up about 200,000 years ago, and we showed up with the DNA that we have now. We haven't changed in those 200,000 years. Now, science cannot tell us why we appeared. That's a whole different story, but they can tell us now genetically how we appeared. And the reason I'm saying this is because we are literally wired for the kinds of experiences that bring us together and allow us to thrive in times of extremes. The DNA that gives us access to our deepest intuition, precognition, the trigger for longevity, the trigger for anti-aging hormones, the trigger for our immune response, all of those things, they appear to be inherent in our being rather than something that develops slowly over long periods of time. And this is one of the reasons I am optimistic, because it tells us that we literally are wired to thrive in times just like we're living right now. And another facet of this is the archaeology now is coming full circle. It's pushing the date of advanced technological civilizations, and this is peer-reviewed science. It's not speculation or Greg's opinion. Peer-reviewed science is now pushing the date for advanced technological civilizations back at least twice as old as what we've been led to believe, back into the last ice age. We're taught that civilization began about 5,000 years ago, and now we know we're talking 12,000, 13,000. That's been confirmed, and it's suspected to go back even further. And the reason that's important is because it means that humans have lived through the cycles of change in the past that we're living through now, and we can learn. If we're smart, we'll embrace these discoveries, and we'll say what worked for them and what didn't. What did they know that we've forgotten? What did they know that we're just beginning to understand? And in that way, we give ourselves the evolutionary edge to thrive and move beyond, not just survive, but to move beyond these times of extremes to become better people and create a better world. And that's where my optimism comes from.
Awesome. Well, we're delivering on the promise here that we shared as we were opening up this panel, that messages in the mainstream media that often aren't hopeful, that we're going to bring around the hopeful messages. And certainly you shared a lot of them here, Greg, that we've been through these cycles before, and that we've demonstrated we can thrive, and we'll thrive this time. And so, which is awesome. Dean, would you want to come in on this?
Sure. I don't spend much time thinking about whether I'm optimistic or pessimistic about the future, because I'm just chronically optimistic about everything. So I have an idea, though, about skepticism, that it is what I've seen change in the type of skepticism about the topics that we're talking about, and especially in the area that I'm most familiar with, having to do with interconnected consciousness. The nature of the experimental work on the theoretical developments has been progressing, just as you would expect in a healthy science. By contrast, the nature of the skeptical reactions to it has been stagnant for probably 50 years. That it's the same old objections are raised again and again, and I take that as a very optimistic perspective, because it means that people who simply don't want to pay attention to these ideas, or for whatever reason they're not interested in them, they're repeating what they have heard again and again, many of which these criticisms are no longer valid. They've been addressed long ago. So that's a sign of a paradigm, an older paradigm that is beginning to fade away. It's simply not supported anymore by the nature of the new science that's coming along. So we may be perhaps 20 years away from historically being able to look back and seeing that we're right in the middle of a paradigm change right now, and that it's probably about a 40-year transition. And I think we're about in the midway, roughly about now.
Yeah, gosh, Ken Wilber recently shared just related to this, that at the time of the Civil War, that the perspective was that we could be slaveholders. But there was this huge shift that was going on, and in the space of 10 years, that all changed, and the people released their slaves. And that likewise now, we're in the midst of this huge shift. We're in it, and he was saying probably 10 years, but it's certainly 20 years that the shift is complete. And the fullness of this shift, when we get to the other side, is almost hard to comprehend, because where we're really embodying and expressing this, I'll use the term divine oneness, it's almost hard to comprehend what society looks like. Well, Lynn, can I go to you? Of course, we're in we're focusing on something that's so much in your body of knowledge and Bruce's too. So Lynn, if you want to come in.
Sure. I asked that very fundamental question in my book, The Bond, which was, does it have to be like this? And was it supposed to be like this? Because it just didn't seem, something seemed to be, out of touch in the way we were being described, the science we were being described as, and who we seemed to be at our most fundamental. And it seemed to be, as Bruce was describing and others, a cultural overlay, this whole thing of eat or be eaten. And so I started researching the latest discoveries in just a vast array of disciplines, from biology and physics and zoology to things like psychology, anthropology, chronobiology, all the ologies basically. And it became really clear to me that the lives we've chosen to lead are not consistent with who we really are. We have really defined ourselves as survival of the fittest, but that's not who we are on every level. When you start looking at people and what makes them thrive biologically and otherwise, you find that we have essentially 4 elements that are really important. The first is a need to belong. We were never programmed to be solitary, as I think Greg was saying. We need to belong so much that essentially the reason that people commit suicide is that they feel that they don't belong. That is the number one reason. And when you look at illness and societies who sustain illness, it's really interesting. For instance, look at the Japanese who transplant to the U.S. A whole bunch of epidemiologists looked at this, and they tried to figure out what was going to happen to them. Because the Japanese are a real paradox. They smoke like chimneys, but they don't get cancer. They don't get lung cancer and in the old country, but some do and some don't when they come to the new country if they transplant to America. So when they looked a little closer, they started recognizing that it had nothing to do with what these people ate. Diet had nothing to do with it. It didn't matter if they ate Big Macs and fries or they had tofu and sushi. What mattered, and the only thing that mattered, was whether they had recreated the close community ties that they had in the old country. And you see that with a number of other things. Belonging in every way is health-giving. Altruism in every way is health-giving. I'm studying that a lot for my newest book, The Power of 8. And altruism is, it is a bulletproof vest, essentially. And also, we have a need for fairness, a deep, inherent need for fairness. And we also expect other people to take turns. So when that kind of thing falls apart, which is basically really programmed in us, our need to make sure that things are fair and other people are fair too. They've found this with so many studies, and studies that people involved in game theory do, just to see what happens to people when they're in a tight situation. And they find, for instance, if they give people $10 and have a partner and they say, you can split that with your partner in any way you care to. And, of course, the assumption is the person's going to keep $9 for themselves and give $1 to the other guy. And the other guy's going to say yes because something is better than nothing. They find that when this is practiced all over the world, the most consistent split is 50-50. We are really programmed to be fair if we've been part of any civilization at all. But as I say, we have this kind of cultural overlay. So what a lot of people like me and a lot of people in our movement are doing are having to look past the old systems of the way we are used to operating with ourselves, which is eat or be eaten, kill or be killed. And so we're used to conflict type means of creating change, of debate. And now the newest ideas are looking at something that is much bigger than the idea of debate and, even dialogue. They're looking at all kinds of aspects of that culture and creating something much more inclusive, and also recognizing that what's really got to change more than anything else is how that person views the world and their own place in it. And as we change, then we start creating structures that change. The other thing that's really interesting about these new movements is a movement away from the giant to the small again. And I think that's what's been very interesting. Once again, I bring it in the UK and Brexit, because that was a vote against the globalized superstate back to the smaller. And I think that's kind of a move and a signal of things to come.
Boy, I feel that is so true. And, of course, there's quite a bit of media attention to this, too, that perhaps this was a nail in the coffin of globalization and that we're moving back to local economies, which would be so healthy. And so that's a positive message. And I love this thing that you brought in, that the consistent split between people as you were studying altruism was 50-50. And that is that's beautiful. And wonderful to hear that also just in a scientific framing, not just as something we might be hopeful for. Bruce, can we bring you in? Of course, your work is so much related to this.
Well, I'm real excited to hear all my colleagues talk, because then it says I don't have to say these things now because they're already out. But what's really interesting is, just as Lynn was talking about the altruistic aspect of human biology, there was a study that I really appreciate about infants that were under 2 years of age, I think about a year and a half. And they performed like a little puppet stage thing where they had these objects interact, and let's say a circle was trying to go up a hill, and then they show a triangle trying to help the circle go up the hill, and then they show a square pushing the circle down the hill. And these infants were watching these interactions, and what was interesting is after the plays, they would give the infant the triangle and the square on a table. The triangle was the one that was helping the circle, and the square was the one that was pushing the circle down the hill. And every time the infant, when given the choice to touch or play with one of the objects, would always pick the triangle one, or the one that was the helping one, as opposed to the other object, which was not helping. The point was very simple. It says an infant less than 2 years old automatically knows that those that are helping are the ones that are friendly, and they play with that, and those that are resistant to helping, the infant avoids. So it really shows that it's built into our nature to do this. And Lewis Thomas years ago wrote a book called The Lives of the Cell, and he emphasized right off in the very beginning that it was inconceivable to consider that any organism lives alone on this planet, that every organism is designed to come together in community. And this is exactly the story that we're beginning to see right now. And the issue is what has kept us apart. It's very interesting because there's an old phrase, knowledge is power. And while people understand that, when I present, I say, listen to it this way. A lack of knowledge is a lack of power. And we have been deprived, systematically deprived as individuals of our own, of knowledge of how we work and how we function. And so the work of Dean and Lynn and my brother Greg are all revealing that the inherent powers that we have been programmed with. And the fact is, programming is a reality. The movie The Matrix, many people perceive it as a science fiction, and the fact is, no, The Matrix is a documentary. Every one of us has been programmed. It's a way that an infant gets off the ground and learns how to become a member of a family and a society is through programming. And the programming, and Greg brought this up as well, is that much of the information, like the Darwinian Theory or the Newtonian world of a physical, mechanical world, is separate from an energy world. These two programs are false, and they're also totally disempowering. And so what's really beautiful is that there's new science that's coming in, and the new science of epigenetics reveals that we're not victims of our heredity and our genetics, that how we respond to life changes our genetics so that we are capable of mastering our biology, as Dean's work has been showing as well, is what's been left out of the equation in history is, from the scientific, or at least the Newtonian view, is the role or relationship of an invisible realm, an energy realm. And that's why our science, our conventional medical science, is so tied up with the physical realm and ignores mind and energy and all that because they're so Newtonian. But the new quantum physics says, look, everything is energy, and the invisible realm, the field. And I love the fact that Lynn has written that book, because when I give my lectures, I said the field, Lynn Mctaggart's book, and everybody nods, so I don't have to explain that. But the field is the sole governing agency of the particle, which all of a sudden changes our world. And the last thing I just want to add to this wonderful change that's coming up is the change, and we mentioned it, is how we relate to each other. Previous to the Internet, our world was based on local interactions, everybody dealing on a local interaction. But the millennial generation, those under 40, were born with computers and born into an Internet age. And the most beautiful part about that is the difference between the older group and the millennial group is that the millennial group is not locally oriented. They're globally connected. They communicate across the world. They don't see the boundaries and the borders that have separated us in the past. So the new knowledge is new empowerment, and between epigenetics and quantum biophysics and the nature of our community, especially the Internet community, is revealing a movement and a transition into self-empowerment. And I trust self-empowerment because right now there are a few individuals that are really representing the power. But if everyone would recognize their own power, then I get so excited because collectively the vast majority of people on this planet want exactly the same thing, which is peace and harmony and love and something to do and take care of the world. And so I'm looking for what we're all talking about, and that is the knowledge to come forth and empower us, which it is doing right now, to move into the world that Greg was talking about, this global community. And hey, Global Oneness Day. What a perfect time to talk about that.
Perfect. Wow. Well, all the themes are coming through, and this is just such a great discussion. This, what you're bringing in here, this whole self-empowerment, where you're talking about millennials that are that are born in the Internet age, where this whole globally connected new knowledge and new empowerment is all coming in. Certainly a true and also positive message there. And I loved where you started as you were talking about these young 1.5-year-olds that were always focusing on the triangle and helping. And because this has come around in our work again and again, where kids are studied, sometimes they refer to this as no control, where there's just always this altruism, this connection, this desire to have fun and to help. And it's a learned behavior, unfortunately, in today's world, these things that go against that. So such a great message. Well, let's go. We're just kind of going down here deeper into things because this next question, again, is one that you all have been talking about, but maybe we can go a little deeper on it. It's regarding how can science inform our spirituality, or we could use consciousness here too, Dean. If it's true that we are all interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent, what does this point us to in consciousness or spirituality in our daily life? And Greg, do you want to go first on this one?
I would love to jump in here, and I think it's this is just a beautiful way to bring this all together. The science is fascinating. The science is important to tell us what's real in our lives and what's not, so we can put our energy into things that are meaningful in our lives. But where it really comes, what I call the spiritual rubber meets the road of life, where this gets real, is how do you apply these things in our lives? This sense of interconnection, I think intuitively, that we all feel. The science is telling us why it is so real. The specialized cells in our body, specialized cells in our hearts that have been here, the DNA, we're now pulling DNA out of fossilized bone marrow from our ancient ancestors. We have the ability to do that, and their DNA is just like ours. And it tells us that we are inherently tuned to one another, and the world around us as well as ourselves, and that we have the ability to consciously interact with that tuning in ways that have, in the past, recent past, have been discounted. But where this really comes together in our time of extremes, what we're finding is that community is so powerful. When people come together in community, and there are many definitions of community. It can be a globally connected community through the internet. It can be a couple of people under one roof. It can be a neighborhood. It can be a number of different ways of looking at community. But this is the key, and Lynn began to allude to this with what was happening in England and the Brexit. What we're finding is that community and localized living are the real-life applications of these scientific and spiritual principles. When we can begin to live locally, local economies, local food, local sources of energy, and our localized living then connects to other localized living in a really powerful way. That's a very different way of thinking about things rather than the centralized model that has been in place, for the last 300 plus years. And I have to say, the centralized model, it worked well enough to get us where we are today. So I'm not going to say we made mistakes in the past. I prefer to see us on a learning curve. And I think if we want to know what the truest model is that will serve us in a responsible, healthy, meaningful way, as we look to nature for the models, because we are natural beings of nature. As we can look to nature for our inspiration, then we begin to apply those principles in our lives, in the economics that Lynn's talking about, in the healing and the biology and the everyday living. And I think this is the key, Steve. And I don't know if we'll have another chance to come around again or not because of the timing. So I'm just going to close this by saying that I think Buckminster Fuller said this so beautifully. He said, if you want to bring about change in the world, you're never going to change the world by fighting the existing reality and the things that you don't like. He said, to bring about change, find a new way of doing things that makes the old way obsolete. And I think that's precisely what we're talking about right now, redefining the answer to our question, who am I? And we're moving from an answer of separation and competition and conflict to community, connection, and cooperation. And I think that's where I'll leave this for right now.
Awesome. Love it. And I love, as we're going deeper, just bringing in this aspect of this living locally, local economics, local food, local sources of energy, and looking to nature for this localized living. Just awesome. And it does seem that that this is going to be, these are the best practices because thought leaders are increasingly talking about this. Gosh, let's go. I'm just looking, grab my notes here for who I was going to go next. I think it was Bruce. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm so busy taking notes. Now, where am I in this?
Well, one of the most interesting parts is actually, as Greg brought up as well, is the return to understanding nature, and that why we've been so disconnected is that one of our beliefs that we've been programmed with is that we are not connected with nature. That in the previous civilization, the church said, well, nature was created, and then humans were added on like an option at the end of the creation thing. And that made the original belief that humans and nature were separate from each other. When we got in the scientific world, we got the same message but in a different form, because the message was in Darwinian theory that the Darwinian theory is two steps. First, what is called a random mutation, followed by a process called natural selection, meaning did that random mutation make the organism stronger or weaker, and then nature will select the stronger ones and carry it on and drop out the weaker. Well, that story also disconnects us from nature because it basically says we got here through a bunch of accidents of mutation. And therefore, I say, well, why are we here? And then you have to say, well, I don't know why we're here. It's just an accident. And it turns out, well, this is totally false, that especially a new understanding of epigenetics reveals that the changes in every organism are connected to the environment. It's the environment that is manifesting and selecting those organisms to be in harmony with nature. And why this is relevant is that we see ourselves as disconnected from nature, and then our actions are like, oh, well, we can do whatever we want. And as we mentioned, that the world is facing the sixth mass extinction of life, and the fundamental drive for this reason of why we're facing it, previous mass extinctions thought to be due to like asteroids or comets hitting the planet and destroying the environment or massive geological activity, science has recognized that human behavior is undermining the web of life, and that we fail to see that we are a result of the web of life, and therefore we don't really or haven't appreciated the fact that by destroying the environment, we're destroying ourselves. This has now come into our consciousness, and this is most important because it returns us back to the environment, it returns us back to our local environment, as Greg also mentioned, and so we are in a movement to see that we are an integral part of nature, and that we are very powerful in influencing how that's unfolding. That gives us responsibility for the first time. That says, no, we are responsible for ourselves and the world in which we live, and we cannot move from where we are to the future until people understand we are each individually responsible for our personal lives and collectively responsible for the influence of civilization on the planet. So this is a wake-up period, and this waking up will help us get that knowledge that will empower us to move from what looks like a very uncomfortable situation into a world we can thrive in.
Awesome. And I'm realizing, gosh, we're down now to 5 minutes, and I've got a couple of minutes here on the back end as we transition to the next panel. So is there any chance, Lynn, that you and then Dean could just go, 30 seconds to a minute with just final things you'd like to offer to all of our listeners? No, you were great. This whole panel's been fabulous.
Okay. The most important thing that I'd have to say really is just that in order to change the world, we have to change ourselves. We have been acting against nature, but it's really important to understand that we are one of the most important generations that's ever lived, because everything we do now is going to affect humanity for all time. And it requires that we start seeing very differently, relating to other people very differently, creating a different view of we. So we talked about everything becoming more local, but our community also has to be more embracing and less tribal of us against them. And mostly we have to become game changers. I think what I really love is the idea of some studies showing that when things are unfair, it very quickly falls apart and everybody stops giving. But all it requires are one or two little game changers to turn the whole thing around. And so I think the most important thing is individual responsibility, and also looking at the idea of what I love is the idea of a superordinate goal, the idea of a goal that can only be accomplished by the collective efforts of the whole community. That has always been a unifying factor. So if in America we can stop we can stop just thinking about who we want to vote for instance, and start looking at the whole a lot more, it will be a lot more, and locally, that will be much more of an embracing type of idea. But the real important thing is for us individually to take back control of ourselves, our communities, and be wedded to the idea, and positively the idea, of evolutionary change.
Oh, gosh, awesome. Thank you, Lynn. And Dean, 30 seconds to a minute, if you could share your final thoughts, please.
Sure. So one thing is that local is now actually global. We live locally, but you look at where your products are made, where your food is made, where decisions that affect your life are made. It is actually global. The Internet has shrunk the world so that local is global. So that's one point, and this is only going to become more and more so, that we need to stop thinking in terms of small communities and even states and countries and so on. We're a shrinking planet very quickly, and this is, for younger people, this is more and more obvious. For the other thing is what can you do in your daily life given these kinds of concepts? And I would say that we have at least 50 years of research now that says two things. One is that your quotidian choice, your daily choice of what you do, it will affect everything. It affects how you shop and what products are available and the way the banks work, and everything is based on billions of people making individual choices. But it actually goes much beyond that, because we now know also, based on research in the laboratory, that what you choose actually pushes the world, not in a causal, a strict cause and effect way, but it pushes the fabric of reality and reshapes the nature of reality itself. So this is one of the reasons why we need to actually think more globally, because if we're all pushing in slightly different directions, then nothing much is going to happen. You know, I may want peace, but if there's somebody else who wants anti-peace, well, it cancels out. So we need to think in terms of a grand mind that actually can reshape the fabric of reality itself and change the way not only our daily lives are, but change the way that our portion of the universe works. So that sounds kind of highfalutin, but nevertheless, that's what we see in the laboratory, and that's what leading-edge science and physics is beginning to tell us.
Wow, well, that'll be the last word, and let me just say again, wow, wow, wow. You know, the wisdom, hopeful messages, and real tangible calls to action here have just been off the charts. I want to thank you so much, Dean Radden, Bruce Lipton, Lynn Mctaggart, and Greg Braden, and also want to thank the enormous listening audience here, all of those who registered for Global Oneness Day 2016, and that are a part of this Amplifield platform, which we're using for our first year this year. Replays are available for free for 48 hours, and if you didn't take notes, you can also order MP3s and digital transcripts from the Global Oneness Day site. If you go to globalonenesssummit.org and click on upgrades, you'll see that. I also want to thank here all of the 2016 Global Oneness Day co-creators who have made this day possible, and then my colleagues and partners in Humanities team who've been involved in planning this for about a year. Next up are some short moments for sound healing with Jonathan Goldman, and then short moments with Pierre Pradervan, who's created a blessing for Global Oneness Day. Be sure to join us. These programs will definitely touch your heart. And before we begin, we're going to go silent for 10 seconds to center ourselves in oneness with the divine and each other. We call this a oneness moment. We're going to begin our oneness moment now.